But I want to suggest to you that the problem of free will is actually deeper than this, is deeper than the problem of cause and effect. And most people think that we have, the problem is we have a subjective experience of free will, but it can't be mapped onto physical reality. You know, I'm about to argue that free will doesn't even correspond to any subjective fact about us. And if you pay attention to your experience closely, you can notice this. If you pay attention, you can see that you no more decide the next thing you think than the next thing I say. Thoughts simply appear in consciousness. Very much like my words. What are you going to think next? What am I going to say next? I could suddenly start talking about the pleasures of snowshoeing. You know, where did that come from? From your point of view, it came out of nowhere. But the same thing is happening in the privacy of your own mind. You've all made an effort to be here and to stay this extra hour to hear, presumably to hear what I have to say about free will. But there's also a voice in your head that is just saying things. Haven't you noticed? And many of these things have nothing to do with what I'm talking about. You're struggling to follow my train of thought, but there's competition. You suddenly start thinking things like, I should probably stop drinking diet soda. Thoughts just emerge in consciousness. We are not authoring them. That would require that we think them before we think them. If you can't control your next thought, and you don't know what it's going to be until it arises, where is your freedom of will? Now, at this moment, many of you are thinking, what the hell is he talking about? Here's what I'm talking about. You didn't pick that thought either. We'll come back to this point. Okay, so now, of course, in a sense, we do think our thoughts before we think them, or at least our brain does. And much of this thinking is something we never hear about. We're conscious of only a tiny fraction of the information that our brains process in each moment. And we continually notice changes in our experience, in thoughts and moods and sensations and behavior, but we are utterly unaware of the neurophysiological events that produce those changes. We consider the sensation of touching your finger to your nose. Feel free to try this. There's no shame in this. Okay, the contact appears simultaneous, okay, but we know at the level of the brain that it can't be. We know that the input from the finger reaches sensory cortex after the input from the nose. And this is true no matter how short your arms or long your nose. Now, if you're of a mind to experiment, it works with your toes also. So, our brains correct for this timing discrepancy by clearly buffering the inputs in memory and then delivering the apparent simultaneity to consciousness. So our experience of the present moment is in a very real sense a memory of the present moment. And even the simplest conscious sensations are built upon unconscious mechanism and unconscious processing of which we are fundamentally unaware. Now, needless to say, this unconscious machinery also governs what we think and feel and do and intend as well, not just perception. And that is where notions of free will and moral responsibility begin to get squeezed. And many people have now demonstrated in a lab that a person's choices, behavioral choices, voluntary choices, can be detected some moments, sometimes seconds, before they are consciously aware of having made the choice. So the physiologist Benjamin Libet quite famously did this with EEG, but this basic paradigm has been replicated with fMRI and even direct recordings from the cortex in surgical patients. In each of these experiments, people are given a very simple task to push a left button as opposed to a right button, or to move their left hand versus their right hand. And they just have to watch a clock and decide when they were first consciously aware of committing to the left or the right. Okay, and you do this, and several experiments over the years have shown that people can go back and forth as much as they want. They become consciously aware of when they're committed. They make their choice. And yet the experimenters, by scanning the brain through one modality or another, know some half a second, depending on what the decision is, even several seconds before they do what they're going to do. Okay, so as a result of this work, it's actually scientifically uncontroversial to say that some moments before you are aware of what you are going to do in making a simple voluntary action, okay, at a time at which you appear to be subjectively free to do whatever you want, your brain has already determined what it is you will do. Okay, and then you become gradually aware of this decision while you still think you're in the process of making it. Now, needless to say, this is very difficult to reconcile with a conventional notion of free will, because this timing discrepancy demonstrates that it would be possible for someone to know what you're going to do before you do, and while you still think you're free to make up your mind. But the truth is, I think actually too much has been made of this research. The truth is, even if there were no time lag, even if a conscious intention were truly simultaneous with its neurophysiological underpinnings, there would still be no room for free will, because you still wouldn't know why it is you do what you do. And again, this is a fact you can notice about yourself directly. Let's run a little experiment. Think of a city anywhere in the world. You can choose any city you want. And now, of course, I could have primed you. I could have artfully placed cues in my speech in the last few minutes that would make you more likely to think of Las Vegas, for instance. So just to be on the safe side, don't pick Vegas. But pick a city, any city, and just pay attention to what this conscious process is like. Now, the first thing to notice about this is as free a decision as you are ever going to make in your life. Okay, you have all the cities in the world to choose from, and I'm just asking you to pick one. Now, several cities have probably occurred to you, and just focus on one. So everybody got a city? All right, well, I'm sorry to say that you all picked the wrong city. Don't ask me how I know this, but I do. So I just want you to do this again, just so you can see what the process is like. Pick another city, can't be the first, and notice what that experience is like. Okay. Did you see any evidence for free will? Now, we better be able to find it here. I mean, if it's not here, it's not anywhere. So let's look for it. First, let's set aside all those cities whose names you don't know and therefore could not have picked. Okay, because you couldn't have picked one of those if your life depended on it. There's no freedom in that, obviously. Okay, and then there are many other cities whose names are quite well known to you, but which simply didn't occur to you to pick. I mean, for instance, perhaps Cairo didn't occur to you. You absolutely know that Cairo is a city, but for whatever reason, your Cairo circuits were not engaged. Okay, as a matter of neurophysiology, Cairo was not in the cards. So I want you to think about this. Were you free to choose that which did not occur to you to choose? Based on the state of your brain a few moments ago, Cairo was not coming. Okay, where is the freedom in that? Of course, if you did think of Cairo, you should consider yourself a genius. Now, so you probably thought of several cities, and then let's say you thought of Paris and New York and Tokyo. Okay, and then you thought, I love Paris. I'm going to go with Paris. And the last minute you thought, no, Tokyo, I'll go with Tokyo. And now this is the sort of decision that motivates the idea of free will. You've got two or more choices, and you're picking between them, and it's just you and your thoughts. There's no coercion from the external world. You are doing it, apparently. But when you look closely, I think you'll find that you are in no position to know why you picked what you picked. In this case, why you chose Tokyo over Paris. I mean, you might have some additional story to tell about it. You might think, well, I had Japanese food last night, and so I remembered it, and I picked Tokyo. Now, of course, we know from psychology that these kinds of stories are rather often false. Whenever people are manipulated in a lab, they always have some tale to tell about why they did what they did, and it never bears any relationship to the actual variables that cause them to behave that way. So you give people, you can cause people to like one person more than another, or to cooperate more in economic games by simply giving them a hot beverage to hold as opposed to a cold one. And they never tell you that the reason they were biased as they were was because of the temperature of the cup in their hands. Okay, psychology is replete with evidence that we are very poor judges of why it is retrospectively, why it is we do what we do. But even if you're right in this instance, okay, even if your choice of Tokyo over Paris is based on your memory of having Japanese food last night, okay, you still can't explain why you remembered having Japanese food last night, or why the memory had the effect that it did. Why didn't it have the opposite effect? Why didn't you think, well, I just had Japanese food last night, so let's go with something new, let's go with Paris? The thing to notice about this is that you, as the conscious witness of your inner life, are not making these decisions. You can only witness these decisions. I mean, you no more picked the city you settled on in subjective terms than you would have if I picked it for you. I mean, so there was this first moment. I said, pick a city. And there's this hiatus where nothing has occurred to you. And then the names of cities start to get promoted into consciousness for reasons you can't inspect. And you can't choose the cities you think of before you think of it. I mean, it's almost like me saying Tel Aviv, Vancouver, Paris, and you simply hearing the words in consciousness. So if you pay attention to how thoughts and intentions arise and how decisions get made moment to moment, I think you can see that there's no evidence for free will, that actually our experience in life is compatible with the truth of determinism. Now, it's also important to recognize that the case I'm building against free will does not depend upon philosophical materialism, the idea that reality is at bottom physical. Now, there are very good reasons to believe that the mind is at bottom physical. Certainly most mental events are the product of physical events. I mean, the brain is a physical system, entirely beholden to the laws of nature. But even if we have souls, even if the human mind were made of soul stuff that we don't understand, nothing about my argument would change. The unconscious operations of a soul grant you no more freedom than the unconscious neurophysiology of your brain does. If you don't know what your soul is going to do next, you're not in control of your soul.